G'day everybody, welcome to another episode of GRM Tech Talk. Today's episode we'll be chatting about shifting gears. 2013 was the beginning of the car of the future era in supercars. One of the biggest changes in the driveline of the car was that we shifted the gearbox from just behind the engine down to the rear there. So we combined the gearbox with the diff in what's called a transaxle. The transaxle in a V8 supercar has 6 gears in it and 1 reverse gear. Back in the old days, when we wanted to change the final drive ratio or the diff ratio of the car, we had to pull the whole rear end apart and put a diff gear in there to change the ratio. Now with the transaxle, that ratio stays fixed and we change the final drive with just 2 cogs on the front of the gearbox. So for this episode, we've actually brought a prop in. We've pulled one of the gears out of the car so you can get an idea of what it takes to transfer 650 horsepower to the back wheels of a supercar. If you were to pull apart the gearbox in your road car, your gears would probably be about half the width of this. This is actually called a spur gear. You can see it's got a long flat tooth on it, so all of the gear teeth are in full contact while it's moving around. This makes it capable of handling extremely high torque. While the spur gear can transfer a huge amount of torque, one of their disadvantages and why you don't see them in your road car is because they're extremely loud when they mesh. If you want to get an idea of what I'm talking about, if you have a manual car, put it in reverse. 9 times out of 10 you've got a spur gear for reverse, you'll hear that loud noise. When people talk about the gearbox in a supercar, you'll often hear the term dog box. What you can see on this gear are these large lugs called the dogs, and this here is your dog clutch. This actually spins on the shaft of the gearbox, and when the driver wants to select a gear, they pull hard and they mesh together and start turning the gears. The reason this gear isn't in the car at the moment, you can actually see these chips on the corner of the dogs. What has happened here is if the driver doesn't use enough force to engage the dog, it actually spits it back off and it can damage the gear and the dog. And the old H-pattern gearbox, if the driver didn't engage the gear and it spat it back out, it wasn't a huge problem. It used to just throw the gear back into neutral and give the driver a good whack on the hand. A bit more serious with these sequential gearbox, as what will happen is it spits the gear out and sometimes it can go down 1 or 2 gears. What happens then is you see 11,000 RPM come up on your tacho and then you've cooked the engine. One of the nastiest things you can do to a gear in a supercar is hit the rev limiter. You can see these lugs are quite spaced out. What actually happens is when it hits the limiter you get reversing torque loads, which means the dog does this on the gear. What actually happens is if you do that enough at a track like Winton, where you're hitting the limiter in 5th on the front straight, you can crack a gear. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of GRM Tech Talk. Looking forward to seeing you next time.